The increasing role of money in politics has continued to fuel skepticism. Additionally, the growing number of post-election litigations has led to debates on whether the judiciary is playing a greater role in determining election outcomes than the voters themselves. While many Nigerians still believe elections are a legitimate means of choosing leaders, a significant portion remain disengaged, raising questions about the effectiveness of voter education and the existence of deeper structural challenges. The issue of inclusivity also remains prominent as Nigerians in the diaspora continue to feel disconnected from the electoral process. Meanwhile, reflections on the 2023 general elections highlight key lessons on election management, transparency, and credibility. As conversations on electoral reform continues, the question remains, what is the single most important change that could restore confidence and strengthen Nigeria's democracy? I am Ezenwa Wagu. Welcome to Electoral Reform Half Hour on NTA News 24 Abuja. This program is brought to you by the Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa, PACA, with support from the MacArthur Foundation. Our guest tonight is Dr. Itia Otagbo, Director of Strategy, African Center for Leadership Strategy and Development, Center LSD. Itia is a seasoned strategic management professional with over 30 years of diverse career experience. He holds a BSc in chemistry from the University of Ibadan and an MBA in strategic management from Ogun State University. A fellow of both the Institute of Strategic Management, Nigeria, and the Mentoring and Career Development Institute. He is also a certified learning and development specialist and a founding member of the Learning and Development Network International, Nigeria. Itia, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you, Izzy, for having me. So
we just went through your rich resume, and you've been deep around, strategic management, leadership, and all of that. So what do you see generally as perhaps the most important, I don't want to use challenge, the most important shift that we have seen in our election, from at least 1999 to date?
Thank you, Izzy. I think to just dive into that question is to look at what happened prior to our 2023 election. I think if you look at the trajectory from 1999 that got to 2015 election, that landmark election that we had, then 2019 and going to 2023, you will notice that there were certain things that became evident when it comes to even the citizens' approach and the citizens' desire when it comes to our election. I think there was a convergence of heightened interest in wanting to shape the next phase of our electoral journey. And I think two things were very, very important that played out at that period, and I think is beginning to shape the next phase of our electoral journey, and that was the issue of technology. And about that same time, there was the high call for an introduction of technology into our electoral system. And that call became so heightened that even the National Assembly, in formulating the Electoral Act 2022, had no choice really but to try and inculcate that into that process. And what that did was that it became a rallying point in galvanizing, especially our young populace, especially those who were voting for the first time. It became an impetus, a kind of incentive for them to engage the process. So you saw that there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest by a wide range of people, with the hope and with the very belief that this time around in 2023, we're going to experience a very close alignment between what the people will go out to express and what the results will be. And I think that, for me, that was a threshold. That was a turning point for us as a country. And as we begin to look at, and I'm sure as we begin to interrogate some of these things here, you are going to find out that that, for me, was the major shift.
Absolutely. And so you look at, in terms of that interest,
Yes.
renewed, heightened interest that you talk about, following it was also the issue of fake news and misinformation.
Exactly.
What did you think that meant for?
Now, you will find out that, that's what I was saying, that you find out that with that interest and with the introduction of technology, I think that there was a mismanagement in terms of putting out there exactly what technology was supposed to do and what technology at the end of the day actually achieved. And that was what gave room for all of those things that we are looking at now as the deliberate misinformation that characterized that particular election. For instance, when issues around transmission of results became so heightened in the polity, and it became such that there was a position taken by INEC, there was a position taken by parties, and there was even a position taken even by civil society. So at the end of the day, it was who was actually giving the right information. Who was actually giving the right information. INEC had a position that they were putting forward, that this was their position concerning beavers, concerning electronic transmission of results, concerning IREF. The political parties had a different interpretation of what they believed that the electronic transmission was supposed to be. Even the citizens, based on who they were listening to, had a different perception. So it depends, therefore, now what you will now define as the fake information or misinformation that was going on. But one thing that we cannot lose sight of is the fact that it was a threshold in our political evolution, in our electoral system, and in our election management.
So how much will voter education contribute in mitigating the effects of fake news and misinformation?
It's the root. But unfortunately, I always posit that we do voter education, maybe 1 year or maybe 6 months or maybe 8 months to the election. Meanwhile, the strategy would have been that voter education should be a continuous exercise, where the strategy is, after each major election cycle, you use the what you call the outcomes, the results of what you observe in real time, to strategize and begin the process of voters education that will prepare citizens for the next election. But what usually happens is that after the election, everybody goes to rest, and we wait for 6 months or 12 months before that general election, and everybody begins to talk. And it is never enough time to do voters education in an ad hoc basis. So I agree with those who proceed strongly that voters education is the, and don't forget that when you talk about voters education, you must also factor behavioral insight. You must factor behavioral insight. The average Nigerian voter as of today has a peculiar behavioral instinct towards election. And if you notice that instinct, that behavioral instinct, is not going to augur well for our democracy, how do you change it? And to change behavior is not something you do in 12 months. It's not something you do in 6 months. It must be a calculated attempt that is based on using established scientific rules and practices to change. And it usually takes a while. So I think that these are the missing gaps that we're not doing when it comes to our elections.
There are people who think that the structural challenges that we face deals a deadly blow on the avalanche of information on election that is thrown out. We are here on election reform, 1 year, 2 years to the election, but poverty, infrastructural deficits, and the general challenge of living condition of the majority of people in the country has something to do with what they even receive in the first instance. So how do we message in a way that takes cognizance of this.
I've often said that we need a strategy. I've often said that you cannot work a strategy in 6 months. I agree with all of those structural deficiencies that you've mentioned. And that's why I've said that if you have a strategy in place, it's not a 1-year cycle thing. It's not a 2-year cycle thing. And I've also mentioned behavioral insights as a vehicle, as a mechanism to change all of those things. Now, all the things that you've mentioned, poverty, low level of education, and all of those things, they are things that you cannot deal with one by one on its own. You must be able to apply a system approach. Why do people take 10,000 naira at a polling unit to vote for a candidate? Why? You must interrogate that. Now, the reason why they take that money is because there is that behavioral instinct that, okay, if I take this one now, it might be my only gain in the whole 4 years of election. So for you to change that man's perception or thinking why that 10,000 is so valuable, you have to be able to change mentality, change behavior, mindset, exactly. And all of those things are things that you do in a systemic and strategic way. So I'm saying here that that's where we have been lacking. We normally will apply an ad hoc effect, an ad hoc approach. Like somebody said to me, an ambulance approach. And then once we do, after the election, everybody goes back and wait for the next 4 years. It will not work. And that, for me, has been the missing link. But if you have a strategy in place, even if by the next cycle, you don't have full circle,
the conversation, and I'm excited, really excited about it. But let's go to how litigation happy our people are, and the rising conversation about whether judiciary is determining outcomes of elections than the voters themselves. And I know that you follow this kind of conversations. What do you make of it?
My take is this. Nigeria is a federal system. You have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And each arm of government has its duties. And the primary duties in all of these things is what is called checks and balances. Now, the judiciary must play its role. If parties come to court to bring a case, you just cannot tell them, look, we are not interested, take away your case. No, they must. I think the root cause is to examine and interrogate. Why are cases landing so much in court that is now impacting the judiciary in such a way that they have to keep adjudicating cases? If a judge is in court and you bring a case to the judge, he can't tell you I'm not interested in the case. He must listen to those cases. So I think that at the very root of all of these things are two major things. The parties themselves. If the parties do not create or engender circumstances and situations within their parties that makes the judiciary relevant to their party issues, the judiciary will not intervene. And I think this last case of the Supreme Court, in the case of the issue of the PDP Secretary General, is an eye-opener. And the Supreme Court saying to the parties, go back and exhaust the internal processes and mechanisms in your party that deals with such issues. If the parties, with their own constitution, that they are practicing themselves, they cannot use that constitution to do the issues, then I won't blame the judiciary. So if you come to court and you are free to go to court, if you do an election and you feel that you didn't get a fair result, that's where the court is. So the same thing, if the electoral systems are such that it gives room, it gives less room for people to have a case to answer, then the judiciary will not have anything to adjudicate. That's my point.
Yes, the Supreme Court judgment you referred to is also threw up a new conundrum in terms of factionalization. Yes. But we'll go on a short break. Yes. Electoral Reform Half Hour. We'll return shortly. Stay with us. Glad to have you back. We've been speaking with Itia Otagbo, the Director of Strategy of Center LSD, the African Center for Strategy, Leadership and Development. Some Nigerians in the diaspora, continue to feel disconnected, especially not being part of the electoral process. And the clamor has continued to get into what people call diaspora voting. And there are a lot of people who are saying, yes, there are a greater percentage of Nigerians who live outside the shores, contributing, paying, remitting, and, huge amount of money into the country. But they have no say in. So we are in the throes of amendment of the Electoral Act. And do you think that is something that we should, consider?
Well, those desire of the diaspora Nigerians is very legitimate, and I think that the conversations around the possibility of that happening is also timely. But I don't think that personally that we have maybe I could use the broad word infrastructure to be able to handle that. We are still trying to handle the one that we are on site and all of that. When you bring the mix of trying to introduce the diasporan voting into real-time election in Nigeria, that would also go into the counting, go into the collation, and go into the announcement of results. Those are the real challenges. But I think that what is happening now is that conversation is beginning. And what is good about such things is that once you begin to have such conversations, then you begin to interrogate how you can make it happen. It might not happen in 2027, but it's good that the convention has started. But I think that while it is legitimate for every Nigerian to feel that he needs to have a say in who becomes the president and other positions in Nigeria, but I just do not, my personal view, think that we are ready yet to be able to entertain that. If there's a technology that comes into play and is able to integrate diaspora voting with what we're doing here, all the good. But I just think that probably we're not just ready. But it's a good conversation starting.
What more measures do you think will promote inclusivity? Yes, there is the early voting conversation, yes, for election workers and the rest of them. There is also conversation about inmates, in correctional centers being able to vote. And some also have what they call absentee voting. Where do we, because we can't just stay and say, oh, we don't have the infrastructure. Yes. But we can remove, we think we can remove the legislative obstacles that make some of this impossible while we work on the mechanics of it.
Yeah, like you mentioned in terms of inclusivity, some of those constituents you've mentioned are things that we can start with, that are like what you could call the low-hanging fruits. For instance, it should not be too difficult to establish a polling unit in a correctional center. It shouldn't be too difficult to have when you have states that have correctional center and you put a polling unit in that place, bring a polling INEC officers to that place, give them the power to vote. So those are low-hanging fruits that I think we can have. But I want to say to you that in the general context of inclusivity, for instance, talking about people living with disability, we've not even been able to perfect even that. You find out that every time you observe election, you find maybe one or two people that come in that group who are able to vote. And then the issues around INEC would say that, okay, we have done our mapping, we know where these people are, we know what they will need, the ones that will need braille, we've made provisions, the ones that will need glasses, we've made provisions. But we have still, after like 2 election cycles now, we've still not been able to perfect even such little ones because of the infrastructure that I mentioned. And as I said to you, I'm a little bit very skeptical about having diaspora voting now. But I agree that there are certain constituents that we can have as low-hanging fruits. I agree that, for instance, the military officers or those who will be the security men that will be deployed during elections, those are people that we can have a mechanism for them to vote before they are deployed, and their ballots can be secured and a system can be put in place to ensure that ballot that they voted is able to get into one polling unit or into one collation center and can be added to the overall. So I agree that inclusivity is a big thing. But like I said, let's start with the low-hanging fruits, and then we can begin to progress into the much more tougher ones.
Thank you so very much. The heavy role of money in our elections, whether from the primary elections, which is really the stronger part of the election, where you see delegates vote buying, and then you come to the general election, you see, all kinds of inducement, voter inducement. What do you think we can do in the light of the reforms that we're thinking about? And I'm not talking about legislative reforms. I'm talking about electoral reforms in its true sense. What do you think needs to happen to be able to ensure more credible, transparent elections?
It's behavioral change. Citizens' behavioral change. And that behavioral change is also tied to the larger society. And that's why I've said that if you can't do it in 6 months, in 8 months. And one of the greatest things that promotes what you've just analyzed now is the fact that we all know that it happened. But it is not one case, not one person, as far as I know, today in Nigeria, has been found culpable when it comes to money. Even the ones that are arrested at the voting polling unit, we don't have any documented case or somebody. Maybe you could correct me, but I don't think I have any documented case.
That are small.
Yes, that. So, and except you also show those examples, it will keep lingering. And like I said, once the citizens too have not gone through that process of behavioral change, it will continue to be a major issue. Then in a society of endemic poverty, that is the system I'm saying that you need to affect strategically.
Itia, we are going on a home stretch now.
Yes.
So 3 things for you that needs to happen that will increase election credibility in our elections.
3 things.
Just 3 short, very short 3 things. Quickly, because we are on the home stretch now. We have just less than a minute to go.
Wow. For me, I would like to see INEC demonstrating more independence in terms of what it does. Number 2, I still think that the political parties still need to function more like a political party. And then the 3rd thing, which we have emphasized there, we must start the voters' engagement right now.
This is where we draw the curtain on today's episode of Electoral Reform Half Hour. And we wish to specially thank Itia Otagbo for your time and contributions on this program. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, Electoral Reform Half Hour is brought to you by Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with support from MacArthur Foundation. We are live every Saturday from 8:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. with a repeat broadcast every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. on same station. Thank you for watching. I am Ezenwawagu.
Patience is equal to